You conjured up memories in my mind. And as I see so many of you, just memories, at my stage, I feed on memories. They give me exceeding pleasure. And every day I should really try to figure out how many hours I spend on memories. And you, seeing so many of you today, the rest of my day is made. Now, it's an interesting and surprising revelation when we learn of a person of outstanding accomplishment who has been living quietly amongst us for many years. Peimin is such a person. He travels to his homeland, China, often, where he has been a visiting professor at universities and the vice director of the Institute of Advanced Humanistic Studies at Peking University. His story of his journey from his native land to Grand Valley is worth relating. He came to do work towards his doctorate at the University of Connecticut in 1985. He came here with an offer to teach at Fudan University in China when he finished his degree. He had earned his master's degree at Fudan. About the time he completed his doctorate, the Tiananmen Square massacre transpired. He organized protests in the U.S. in support of the Chinese student rebellion. At that time, he met with the chairman of the philosophy department at Fudan, who was in Canada. He asked if he should return. The chairman told him officially, yes, but personally, I tell you no. Soon after, in 1992, he accepted a position in Grand Valley's Department of Philosophy, one of the college's most distinguished. Ever since, he has contributed to that distinction. When he first returned to China, he was met at his parents' apartment by Chinese security. He told me after a few years, they stopped checking on him. Professor Ni is the author of more than 80 scholarly papers and 11 books, including Understanding the Analytics of Confucianism. He has led Grand Valley students to study China. He is the founder of the Association of Chinese Philosophers in America. He is one of, if not the world leader in Confucian philosophy of Gongfu. I could list all the honors he's received, all the international recognition of his work, but it would take double my time, and is best for you that you now hear from Professor Dr. Peimin. Peimin?
Thank you so much, Don. It's a great honor. Should I? Okay. Thank you, Don, for your glorious introduction. I'm humbled. And good morning, everybody. It's my second time speaking at the Grand Forum. Now, from the introduction that was given a moment ago, I realized it must be at the beginning of the Grand Forum when I came, because it feels like 30 years ago. By then, I was looking at the audience and thinking, wow, the old age is far away from me. Now I realize the young age is far away from me. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much. Let me grab. When I was given the topic to talk about Chinese thought, I felt, gee, I wish I have a whole semester to talk about it. It's like facing a big watermelon without knowing where to start. Okay. So I want to begin with my own favorite concept, Gongfu, and it was a little story. Let's see. That in 2010, doesn't work. It was working. The picture freeze. Okay. All right. So, can you try it? Okay. It just came out. Okay. All right. Yeah, in 2010, I got a phone call from an editor in New York Times telling me that they had launched a forum on philosophy called Stone. And he said after running for a few months, they haven't had any article on Chinese philosophy. So he asked me, would you like to contribute one? I said, well, let me think about it. So I called him back in 2 days, telling him that I want to write on Gongfu. He was a bit surprised. He thought I was going to talk about like yin and yang, feng shui, that kind of stuff. I told him that I think Gongfu is probably more fit for characterizing Chinese thought. So came this article, Gongfu for Philosophers. And this article is less than 2,000 words, but it's the most influential one that I've ever published. Within 1 week of its publication, I got over 500 comments and about 100 emails from all over the world. Most of them were very enthusiastic and resonate well with what I was talking about. Now, in the article, the main points are that Gongfu is not just merely martial arts. When people hear about Gongfu, they typically first think about martial arts, Jackie Chan, Kung Fu Panda. Right? But it applies to all kinds of arts of life. In Chinese language, if a person is a great leader, like Dom, people will say, oh, you have a great Kung Fu of leading. If a person has a great skill in dancing, people will say, you have a great Kung Fu of dancing. So the word is used very broadly to mean just the art of life in general. And Chinese thoughts, mainly the Confucianism, Taoism, and Buddhism, these are the three major schools of thought in traditional China. They can all be considered teachings about the art of life. So teaching about Kung Fu. And then Kung Fu can also be used as a comprehensive philosophical approach to look at everything. It means to look at everything through the perspective of the art of life, how to live one's life. So 2 years ago, a journal of world philosophies invited me to write my own autobiography. So I titled this A Journey to the Way of Gongfu, in which I traced back how I began my career as a philosopher, how I was first became interested in philosophy, and then became a philosopher. And then on the way, I discovered the Gongfu. How did I become a philosopher? Well, when I was very young, in my teenage, the Cultural Revolution started. That was when the Chinese leader Mao thought that the country was going toward the wrong direction, capitalism, and he wanted to correct it. At least that's his official reason. Behind it, it's political power, fight. But soon the whole country was in chaos, and I was very confused. In my mind, my parents were heroes. They were government officials. They were both communist members, joined the Communist Party during the Second World War, fighting against the Japanese invasion. And in their mind, communism is this kind of ideal society in which there is no exploitation, oppression, no discrimination. So they were very enthusiastic. But then things happened in the Cultural Revolution, really puzzled me, and they were put in house arrest, accused of being, this kind, that kind of crimes. So I started to wonder about life, about society. And then I was, after middle school, I was assigned a factory job as an electrician, climbing poles, building high voltage wires. And since everything was chaotic, the crew leader accidentally forgot that one power line was connected, sent me and another coworker up to the pole to work on something. And then I got an electric shock. 6,000 voltage electricity went through my body from hand to hand. The coworker saved my life. He risked his own by putting out his pliers, dragged out my pants. He was a little bit below me. And that got me disconnected. Later, when I asked him, why did you do that? Later he told me he thought I was dead already. And he still risked his life to do that. I said, why did you do that? He said, well, simple. I just couldn't bear to watch you being burnt like that. At the moment of the electric shock, I didn't lose consciousness immediately. I had a moment of awareness that I was going to die. And that's it. But I had a deep feeling of regret, as if I had something undone. So afterwards, I often think about that. What was that thing that I felt I left undone? Well, it's a philosophical question about the meaning of life. So when schools reopened after Cultural Revolution, they recruit students from nationwide. So I went to apply, and they let me fill wishes, 3 wishes. Okay, which major you want to be in. In China, you assigned a major when you enter into a college. So the first line, I entered philosophy. The second line, I entered philosophy again. The third line, still philosophy. I was determined to search for truth, search for answers. And these 2 triggered me into one's Cultural Revolution, one that was the personal experience. And then at the Fudan University, where I did my undergraduate and master's degree, when I was doing my master's degree, we graduate students at the philosophy department launched a lecture series open to the entire campus and to the community, to the public. And our slogan was, "If I don't go to hell, who does?" This was a remark made allegedly by a bodhisattva who vowed to go to hell to save the sentient beings before he reaches nirvana himself. His vow was, if the hell is not empty, I would not go to nirvana. So that was our ambition, that we want to save the country, if not the whole world. That lecture series hit the national news. And my field of study at Fudan in graduate school was actually in Western philosophy, British empiricism. I thought that's what China needs. Science, technology, democracy, things that are modern, not traditional China. We need to leave the traditional China behind. We need to move forward. And so, in my PhD study at the University of Connecticut, my focus was still on Western philosophy. When I applied for Grand Valley's job, my area of specialty, AOS, was modern Western philosophy. And Chinese philosophy was my field of confidence, areas of confidence. Okay. But at Grand Valley, after I came to United States, at UConn, I was already asked to teach a course on Chinese philosophy. So when I dig deeper into Western philosophy and at the same time looking back at Chinese philosophy, I gained a renewed appreciation of my own cultural tradition. This cultural tradition was criticized for the last 100 years. At the beginning, at the wake of China's modernization, at the beginning of the last century, when foreign powers invaded China and China was forced to sign numerous humiliating treaties, it triggered a nationwide reflection about what's wrong with Chinese own tradition. So the May 4th movement had a slogan called "Welcome to Misters," Mr. Tsai and Mr. De. Tsai for science, De for democracy. And Confucius, excuse me, Confucius, who had profound influence on Chinese culture, was criticized responsible for China's backwardness, conservative tendency. And he was portrayed in the West also not so favorably. Here's a cartoon that has a board behind that's supposed to be Confucius in his office. And on the board it says, "The road may fork, so drive carefully. Do not let the bad bugs bite. Look like we are in for some rain." Kind of things that are so meaningless, so trivial, and out of date also. And German philosopher Hegel once remarked that one looks in vain for speculative philosophy in Confucius' works. It would have been better if Confucius were not translated. Well, I was sort of in that kind of mentality myself. Back then, when I was in my college and graduate school in Fudan. So I was pursuing Western philosophy. And here, a famous short history of Chinese philosophy written by Feng Youlan, who was John Dewey's student, graduate from Columbia University in 1923. What he did was trying to select from the intellectual resources of the classics and find elements that resembles Western philosophy and squeeze into the framework of Western philosophical concepts and ways of thinking. Okay. So it's like wrapping your feet into those tiny shoes, When my friends and I, who were studying philosophy in the West, created the journal, Tao, a journal of comparative philosophy, we were struggling with the problem known as the legitimacy of Chinese philosophy. Whether there is philosophy in China done by Chinese, or there is something that's genuinely can be considered Chinese philosophy. And there is a newsletter article that tells us that of all the US and the Canadian PhD programs listed on the overall ranking page of Brian Leiter's Philosophical Gourmet Report, there are only 3 specialists in Chinese thought whose primary appointment is in philosophy. The whole field of Chinese philosophy. Imagine like the whole field of Western philosophy, okay? China is the size of a continent with 5,000 years of civilization. In contrast, on this, the author's conservative but admittedly imperfect count, the same programs have 99 full-time faculty who specialize in Immanuel Kant, German philosopher, alone. A ratio of 33 to 1 of the entire Chinese philosophy. And 58 full-time faculty who specialize in medieval philosophy, a ratio of about 19 to 1. Okay. So Chinese philosophy was considered not really philosophy, but you can find it maybe in area studies, in religious studies. When Derrida, a famous European philosopher, visited China in 2001, he was having a conversation with a Chinese intellectual, Wang Yuanhua. And he made this remark: China had no philosophy, but only thoughts. Well, actually, he was praising, admiring China, because he is a postmodern thinker. He thinks the Western philosophy is too limited way of thinking, has a lot of problems, and Chinese traditional thought didn't have these kind of problems. But the reply from Wang Yuanhua was, oh yes, we did have philosophy. The preaching logicians, the chapter of Tianxia, or on the heaven in the book of Zhuangzi, etc., they contain no shortage of propositions similar to those found in Western philosophy. So he was trying to, again, to use the Western framework, philosophical framework, to interpret Chinese thought, selecting those elements that looked like Western philosophy. So this dialogue itself is very interesting. One is still in the modern Western framework, the Chinese intellectual, whereas a European postmodern thinker want to get out of this framework. Now, Donald Monroe, a professor, philosophy professor at the University of Michigan, good friend of mine also. He made a very insightful remark. He said, in China, truth and falsity, in the Greek sense, have rarely been important considerations in a philosopher's acceptance of a given belief or proposition. These are Western concerns. The consideration important to Chinese is the behavior implications of the belief or proposition in question. What effect does adherence to the belief have on people? For the Greeks, study was valued both for its own sake and as a guide to action. After all, Plato did write the Republic, and Socrates did maintain that he who knows the good does the good. But bliss lay primarily in study for its own sake. And Chinese modern Neo-Confucian scholars, Mo Zhongshan and Xu Fuguan, also made a very insightful general observation that in the West and the East, the cultures originate from different starting point. In the West, it started from a sense of curiosity. So that leads to truth-seeking discourse. Whereas in China, it started from anxiety, what to do, how to live. So that led to a Tao pursuing, Tao means the way, Tao pursuing wisdom. Well, here, this young man was with a famous contemporary philosopher, Richard Rorty. Richard Rorty has a very influential book called The Mirror of Nature, in which he characterized traditional mainstream Western philosophy as like trying to play the role of a mirror, reflecting what is reality. But he thinks that the important thing is to have a lever to change the world, to affect the world. And that can be applied to the difference between Western philosophy and Chinese thought as well. So when you look back at the traditional Chinese thoughts, such as this is a very ancient book called the I Ching, or the Book of Changes. There is a proposition that says the successive movement of yin and yang constitute the way. Now, this line of statement can be read in two very different ways. One is truth-knowing reading. From the truth-knowing reading, it is a metaphysical proposition stating that the way reality is, the way of the universe is the oneness that embraces a contracting force, yin, and a expanding force, yang. That's about what reality is. But it can be read in a very different way. That's the Gongfu reading. It is an instruction that guides one's life, that one should maintain a balance between expansion and contraction, motion and rest, seeking manifestation and retaining original subtlety. And in the West, Plato's cave allegory is very famous. I bet you all know that Plato wrote about this, that suppose that there are slaves chained in a cave for their lifetime, never seen outside world. All they saw was shadows casted on the wall of a cave, so they mistake the shadow as reality until one of them managed to escape the cave and see, wow, that's the real world. So he thinks that the phenomena that we see are like the shadows on the wall of the cave. We need to study philosophy to get to reality. And Descartes, a European philosopher, had the famous dream that dream argument. He said, well, what if everything that we are perceiving is a dream, right? What is reality? How can we be sure that we are knowing the reality? Well, similarly, a Chinese philosopher, Zhuangzi, said that he had a dream. He had a dream that he was a butterfly. But then when he wake up, he said, well, I'm Zhuangzi. But then he said, wait a minute, am I Zhuangzi who had a dream that I was a butterfly, or am I the butterfly who is dreaming that I'm Zhuangzi? So both these arguments can all be interpreted as pursuing for truth. What is reality? But Zhuangzi, after he presents his dreaming argument, he says, well, then I realized that's the transformation of life. From dream to reality, they are just different stages of the same life. So go along the flow. So he draws a lesson about life from that. Whereas in the West, both Plato and Descartes went to the direction of pursuing what's the eternal, ultimate truth. Okay. And in Buddhism, you know, here is a picture of a Tibetan Buddhist drawing a sand mandala. A beautiful picture would take weeks or even months to build. And after finish it, they will ceremonially smash it to force themselves to realize everything is just momental. It's just an appearance, a process, so that you don't stick to everything, you know, or anything, right? Don't attach to anything. That's the way to free yourself from suffering. So, yes, it's a view about reality. About reality, that's all just, there's no substance, no permanence, but it's more a way of life. How to live your life, non-attachment. That's the fundamental purpose of this teaching. Now, my own field is more on Confucianism. I will talk a bit more about Confucianism after I give you this conceptual analysis. The concept of Gongfu, I was looking for a concept that will capture this kind of essential feature of Chinese thoughts. Then I discovered this concept that was used frequently by the Neo-Confucians during the Song and the Ming dynasty, which is like roughly equivalent to the medieval period in the Western culture. They used the word Gongfu to characterize the entire teachings of Confucian learning. The concept entails 4 dimensions. It's like a name of a cluster of subconcepts. Originally, it meant time and effort spent on something. When you launch a project of building a road, you say, how many Gongfu we need? How many laborers we need? Then the term was expanded to mean ability, skills, talents needed for making your effort, for having the road. You don't just need workers. You also need skilled workers who know what to do, right? How to do it. So methods, approach, style became attached to the concept of Gongfu also, and finally, the function and effect of the labor you spend. So in general, it means the art of life. This concept can be used as a comprehensive philosophical approach, as an approach of not only reading Chinese philosophy, because when Feng Youlan, the guy I mentioned who authored the short history of Chinese philosophy, he was trying to squeeze Chinese thoughts into the framework of truth-seeking philosophy, seeking for truth. what is the ultimate reality, what is this and that. But when we look at Chinese philosophy as a way of life, as art of life, you will see different things. It can be also used as an approach of looking at everything else, including Western philosophy. You can ask, from the Gongfu perspective, you can ask, what would Plato's philosophy lead us to? What kind of lifestyle would that lead to, right? What would, Nietzsche's philosophy lead us to? What would Heidegger's philosophy lead us to? So it can be a comprehensive philosophical approach. I will use a few examples from interpreting Confucius. Now, the Analects of Confucius is like the Bible of Confucianism, the kind of teaching that was ridiculed by Hegel as the kind of so meaningless collection of, of sayings. There are about 40-some English translations already. And in the process of teaching this Confucian philosophy again, finally I decided to create one English translation of my own. This is resulted in a 600-page book. It includes detailed annotations of those passages. Behind that, like there is a fork in the road. What's the significance behind? And by the way, this book won a national prize, Modern Language Association Book Prize. I didn't take it seriously until another colleague told me, wow, that's like the Oscars in the field. Now, in the book, the very first passage begins with this sentence: to learn and to practice what is learned repeatedly. Is it not pleasant? Very simple statement. Okay, but you can. After reading the Analects again, I realized it's like a compressed computer file. You need to unzip it to see the rich content in it. So even in a simple statement like this, you can see a lot of things. First, you can ask, to learn and to practice what is learned repeatedly. Is it not pleasant? Well, when you ask our students to read a text repeatedly, they feel bored, right? They don't feel pleasant. What kind of learning that will make you feel pleasant? When you learn an art. When you learn an art, you practice repeatedly and then you become better and better at it. You will feel pleasure. Okay, so it's more like a practical learning. A British philosopher, Gilbert Ryle, in the 1930s and 40s, around that time, wrote a book and brought up the notion called know-how. Next to know that is the case, that there is a table here in the room. You also have another whole branch of knowledge called know-how. How to swim, how to ride a bicycle, how to drive a car, how to do everything. This whole range of knowledge has been ignored by Western philosophy. Okay. And this was as if it's triggered a lot of enthusiasm, as if people suddenly realized, wow, we have know-how while you're doing this and benefiting from it all your life, right? And all the history. It itself, it was amazing that this is considered a big discovery. And since then people started to study know-how. When I first saw a book dedicated to know-how by an analytical philosopher, Jason Stanley. I was excited. But then once I opened the book and I started reading it, I realized that all he was talking about is how we can reduce know-how to know that. So squeeze back into the shoe. He called Gilbert Ryle's theory as anti-intellectualism. So this topic itself then leads a lot for us to compare the Eastern philosophy and the Western philosophy. How to obtain Gongfu knowledge? Can we obtain Gongfu knowledge, know-how by reading propositions about know that, right? Can somebody learn how to swim by reading all the propositions and remember it about swimming? Then I created my own theory or account about the relationship between know-how and know that. Basically, I claim that they are different and yet tightly intertwined, like the symbol of Tai Chi. I call it reciprocism. Know that involves know-how, like when you know 5 plus 7 equals 12, that entails the ability to count. Knowing black and white entails the ability to separate them apart. Know-how involves know that. Know-how to fix a car involves knowing about the car. If you don't know about the car, how can you fix the car? And know that can lead to know-how. Knowing a fuse is burned enables one to restore its electricity. And the other way also, that know-how can lead to know that. Knowing how to Google can lead to a lot of knowledge. So, what counts as true knowledge? This further leads to the question about what counts as true knowing. There is also a Confucius statement in the Analects that says, the age of your parents may by no means not to be kept in mind. On the one hand, as a source of joy. On the other, as an alarm. As a joy because you know they lived up to an old age. That's great. As an alarm, that means you got to realize they are getting old. Okay, they need more and more care from young people. So knowing one's parents' age is not just knowing, oh, they are 72, they are 81, but also you got to have this kind of mentality, joy and alarm. That counts as true knowing. Similarly, knowing a person is not just knowing what's this person's name, but also knows this person's weaknesses and merits. Knowing ritual means that you know not only what's the procedure of a ceremony, but also knowing that you should do it in this or that kind of occasion, and etc. And so, Zhu Xi, a famous Chinese philosopher, once said that having read the Analects and yet remains the same person, that's no different from not having read it. Okay. So it's not just intellectual knowledge you put in your mind. And knowledge is related to the cultivation of one's virtues and virtuosity. Remember the saying that Confucius said, you need to practice what is learned repeatedly. And practice and practice until you realize a lot of things that you did not see in the first place. So here I have two examples. One is tea ceremony. In the East, we have tea ceremonies so that people will sit down and then enjoy the tea by first smelling the fragrance of the tea, burn incense, right? and warm the cup. These are all processes to prepare you, not only the tea, but also you, the drinker, the taster. Once you calm down and in an appreciative mode of mind, then you can notice things that you would otherwise not be able to perceive. The next example is a game called Go, Wei Qi in Chinese. Its basic rules are very simple, yet it can be very, very complex. This game can be very, very complicated. And a beginner and a master can both see the same board, apparently the same thing they are looking at, but see entirely differently. The master can see a lot of intricacies that the beginner cannot see. So you need to cultivate yourself in order to perceive the world. So what you perceive is related to your cultivation. Here's a picture of a girl called, they call her Jeannie. She was kept in an isolated room by her father when she was 20 until she was discovered in her 13 years old. She never had communication with outside, and she didn't develop her language ability. And so when she was rescued, doctors first tried to help her to regain her ability of speaking. They made some progress, but eventually they found it was already too late. So learning is not just something that we can always do. Yes, we can always do, but the older you get, the less you are able to learn in many ways than young people. So Plato's cave allegory did not point out is that the slaves, when they are chained in the cave for a long time, they may lose their ability to see the bright light. And this further raised the question about, have we all been in various sort of caves? And the matter is not just that you should escape the cave, but also you should escape the cave before it's too late. Interestingly, Confucius once remarked that if a person at the age of 40 still invokes dislike, this person is hopeless. Invokes dislike. He is sometimes humorous. Well, it points out the age, when Gongfu is learning an art. Learning an art, it's just like learning martial arts, right? Right now, for us, people in this room, it's too late for us to learn, the acrobats, right? So, here we have one characteristic of Kung Fu learning is that you learn from masters, learn from models. Okay. So in the Chinese tradition, it's the master-disciple relationship rather than the Aristotelian kind of teacher-student relationship. Here it might be too difficult to read. We have two contrasting passages. One is by Immanuel Kant, who is famous for his leading role in the European Enlightenment. And his slogan, sapere aude, which means literally dare to think, dare to know, dare to pursue knowledge with your own intelligence, rationality. he famously said that enlightenment is man's emergence from his self-imposed nonage. Nonage is the inability to use one's own understanding without another's guidance. And yet, a European postmodern thinker, Michael Polanyi, said something that Confucius would more agree with. He said, to learn by example is to submit to authority. You follow your master because you trust his manner of doing things, even when you cannot analyze and account in detail for its effectiveness. By watching the master and emulating his efforts in the presence of his example, the apprentice unconsciously picks up the rules of the art, including those which are not explicitly known to the master himself. These hidden rules can be assimilated only by a person who surrenders himself to that expert uncritically to the imitation of another. A society which wants to preserve a fund of personal knowledge must submit to tradition. So we have two contrasting messages. One is to dare to think by yourself without reliance on another or guidance. The other says how important it is for you to have guidance, right? But actually they are not contradicting each other. When you look at it from the Gongfu perspective, at a young age you need more guidance. But once you reach certain maturity, you need to start to think by yourself, not blindly accept authority, right? So it's a development model. Okay. Now, Gongfu can be an approach to not just to knowledge, but to metaphysics also. Here I have two pictures. One is archery. Confucians often use archery as a metaphor for learning. You learn the art of archery in order to hit the target properly at the center. Okay. And next picture is, it's here, it's too much light. It's in the meeting of World Congress of Philosophy 2018, held in Beijing, China. The theme of the conference is learning to be human. Learning to be human. About human beings, there are a lot of theories. We, Grand Valley, we philosophy department have a course called Human Nature. Okay, what is human nature? Who are we? Confucius had only in the entire book of the Analects, just one remark about human nature, in which he says humans are similar in nature. It is through habitual practice they diverge widely. So his emphasis is not on that what is human nature, but rather our malleability, that our changeability, the need to transform ourselves to be better. In the Analects, he also says, compares the cultivation of a human being as carving, as filing, as grounding, as polishing. You become a better and better person. A colleague on Confucian studies says, according to Confucianism, humans are human becomings. Human becomings. There are a lot of theories about human nature. A Confucian scholar, shortly after Confucius, his name is Mencius, he argues that what makes human different from animals is the four hearts: the heart of compassion, heart of shame, heart of courtesy and modesty, and heart of right and wrong. Overall, it's a person's sensibility to people's pain and suffering and joy. It's moral sentiment that makes a person a person. Aristotle thinks what's distinctive about human being is our intellect. Buddhism thinks that we are nothing, so to speak. We're not things, we are processes. Okay. And Jean-Paul Sartre thinks that we are what we choose to be. Taoism thinks that we are like uncarved blocks. All these different views about human nature are actually different ways of conceiving ourselves. And these different ways of conceiving ourselves have effect on how to live our life. If you consider yourself primarily an intellectual being, then you emphasize the importance of knowledge. If you emphasize the importance of compassion, then you become a loving being. That's what qualifies you as human. If you emphasize yourself as a choice maker, then it's a matter of making choice that's considered important to a human life. The Taoists consider yourself as a pool, like the little cartoon figure, pool. His name is derived from Taoist concept, pu, which means uncarved block. So, yeah. So anything that makes you not natural, that's bad for you. That, again, is a way of, a recommendation of which way of life you should lead to. So I need to skip some slides to save the time. Karl Marx once said, well, actually this line is carved on his gravestone, that philosophers have only interpreted the world in various ways. The point, however, is to change it. But I think he missed a point. So I modified his statement. I say philosophers may well construct their theories to interpret the world, yet whether they intend it or not, their ideals have always affected people's way of thinking, in this way or that way. Gongfu can also be taken as an approach to ethics. For the sake of time, I'll skip it, but you can look at the slides. They should make the point. Let me see. Here, I would like to just pick out this concept, 孝 in Chinese. Why be moral? How to be moral? How to be moral? The Confucian view is that you need to cultivate a loving, caring attitude from serving your family members, primarily your parents first. This cultivation begins in your family. The Chinese character 孝. Now here you see a picture of one of the top 20s of the 2014 art prize in Grand Rapids. That was one of the 20 top ones. Okay. And it resembles so much the original Chinese word 孝. 孝 means being filial to your parents. And the word 孝 consists of two parts. The upper part is an elderly person with long hair, and the lower part is a child. Just like this, a child carrying an old man. And Confucius says, to be孝is more than just to feed your parents when they are old. You need to respect them. The difficult part is to have continence, that your expressions, not just, oh, here, that's your food. Now here, that's to support your expenses. No, it's the continence, it's your attitude. And then from there, once you begin to be able to love your parents, love your siblings, then you have a solid base to extend your love outwardly to others, infinitely. All the way to first treat your own family as a family, then treat your own community as a family, then treat all over the world as a family, and treat the entire universe as a family. It's not that you always just to teach that you should have universal love. The Gongfu approach is that you begin from just around you, yeah, and then extend. And then the Gongfu approach can also be applied to spirituality. In spirituality, we have two essential issues. One is about immortality. The Chinese notion of immortality is this worldly. You can achieve immortality in this world by having offsprings, continue your family line, and by those so-called three immortalities, establishing virtue for people to emulate, achievements for people to benefit from, and words for people to follow. It's all relational. It's like you are building a legacy here. You have a lovers stadium. Become immortal. And another issue is about deities. Is Confucianism a religion? Does Confucius believe in deities? Well, there is one saying in the Analects. Once you unpack it, it says a lot. That saying is, when sacrificing to the spirits, do it as if the spirits were around. I call this as if-ism. This is not theism. It doesn't tell you that there are deities. It's not atheism. It's not telling you that there are no deities. It's not skepticism, not agnosticism. It's none of these. It's its own kind, as-ifism. Through as-ifism, you establish moral subjectivity, as if heaven is watching, as if your ancestors are watching, as if your children are watching, as if your spouse is watching, your colleagues are watching, right? What you do, create this kind of spiritual world. So I compared with Pascal's wager and Kantian philosophy. And finally, I want to reach one point about the Gongfu implication to social-political philosophy. In the 8 stages of Confucian program, it starts from investigating things, obtain knowledge, and make will sincere, rectified heart mind, cultivate the person, to regulate the family, govern the state well, and bring peace to the world. So it does not stop at personal level. It extends to the social and political realm as well. And a modern Confucian scholar, Kang Youwei, once said that from his study of Confucianism, he digged out some resources and laid out a time dimension of Confucian vision of society. In the ancient time, the era of chaotic occupations, you need an authoritative government. Like having sage kings, like loving parents, governing a group of little kids. And then in the era of peaceful coexistence, you need a constitutional sovereign. And in the era of grand harmony, you can have a democratic government, like an ideal family. Well, there's a lot we can unpack again here. One thing that captures the spirit of the ideal society is when once Confucius was sitting with several of his close disciples, he asked it, well, normally you say that people don't appreciate you. Now, suppose that you are allowed to do whatever you like. Okay, you get appreciated. What's your aspiration? And one by one, they said they want to serve the society, they want to serve a place in the government, and do this and that. Finally, one student said, well, my aspiration is different. I want to be in the late spring when the dresses of the season are made, ready. I would like to take along 5 or 6 young men, 6 or 7 boys, to bathe in the Yi River, enjoy the breeze at the rain altar, and then return home singing. Surprisingly, Confucius, I'm with Dian. People normally would expect that he would say, oh, I agree with those who have ambitions to serve the society. Why did he say, I'm with Dian? Well, that reveals that in his mind, an ideal society is not only one in which people well cultivated themselves, but also a society in which people don't need to feel the hardship of to be a good person. You don't have to fight against dark forces in order to be a good person. Okay, you can just be like Zheng Dian, relaxed and enjoy life. This then leads to a lot of things in our social political philosophy, in morality as well. So, concluding remarks. Okay. The World Philosophy Congress of Philosophy in recent years, recent decades, have been gradually shifting toward focusing more and more on the real life and the real situation of the world. That reminds me of Richard Rorty, who said in 1967 in his famous edited book called The Linguistic Turn. At that time, people were thinking that world philosophy is turning toward study of language. But in the introduction of that book, he said, not many people notice it, the only moral that may be drawn from examining the linguistic turn, I think, is that the metaphilosophical struggles of the future will center on the issue of reform versus description, of philosophy as proposal versus philosophy as discovery. So I anticipate this Gongfu turn, the turn toward facing the reality. We are in a world that's very troubled, as we all know, right? So if Gongfu is the ability to grow, to become mature, right? We human beings, as a whole race, need to get mature. And we need to not only cultivate ourselves, but also find ways to so-called extrasomatize, externalize our Gongfu, so that it becomes social reality. It becomes something that independent of individual persons, becomes social infrastructure, becomes social system, like genuine democracy, so that people don't have to fight against dark forces constantly. They can live an enjoyable life. Okay. So, thank you. Oh, I should take some questions.
For questions, we do have some folks joining us online, and for those in the room, I do ask that you ask the questions in the mic. So,
thank you. I feel like we may be in the Matrix. And I'm particularly concerned about it in terms of artificial intelligence. I'm really scared.
Yes.
About, where is reality and what are we going to perceive as reality? And how can Confucius help us?
Well, Confucius here would join Zhuangzi to say that whether it's reality or it's virtual reality, that doesn't really matter too much. Virtual reality is also part of the reality that we are facing, right? So it's like the transformation of life. You transform from real physical writings to things that in the cyber world, we can transform between these, but then we need to think about implications of the changes. I was once having a conversation with an environmental philosopher, and after we both mentioned how problematic the world is, I said that we are like in a big caravan rushing toward the edge of a cliff. And he said, well, no, we are already off the cliff. Well, he studied a lot about environment, about global warming, and implications of all these changes. So I believe his remark was not just a sarcasm, but pretty serious. But anyway, Confucius was once described as a man who would try his best, although he knew it was hopeless. Does that answer your question?
First of all, thank you. This was really wonderful. So as I understood the first part of your presentation, you're talking about Kung Fu in a way that seemed to apply to all of life. Mm-hmm. And you talked about Buddhism and Taoism and Confucianism as part of Kung Fu, am I right?
Yeah.
And then in the latter part of your talk, you talked about Kung Fu and Confucianism, and you kind of equated the two. But earlier, I was wondering, if Kung Fu is about the skills and the material and the people, I just wondered what isn't Kung Fu? It seems to embrace all of life, and then later Kung Fu seemed to be more particularly Confucian approaches. So.
Later, I was mainly using Confucianism as example to illustrate the importance of Kung Fu. And because I'm primarily a Confucian scholar, this is my field that I'm more familiar with. And also, Confucianism is the mainstream of Chinese thoughts. It's the dominant ideology for the past over 2,000 years, overall speaking. Taoism and Buddhism is always like the undercurrent. So nowadays, facing with the world situation, I'm thinking about what Confucianism can contribute to the modern world of philosophy and contemporary human life. So I used more of Confucianism as an example. But indeed, yes, what I have not spoken about doesn't mean they are meaningless, or they are not equally, or sometimes in some aspects even better resources. It's possible, yeah.
Or maybe one more question?
One of the places I got stopped in my mind was about how supposedly as you age, you can't learn or you don't learn. And I thought, I think there's some recent research. I somehow think it's a neurology that has been looking at learning in adults. And they have found that older people are learning things and are able to share things that younger people don't catch as they're doing things. And part of that relates both intellectually and as how we relate to one another. As I recall the article, and I have to remember, I don't remember its exact citation, but it's there. Have you looked at that more clearly and looked at how learning is being looked at by the neurologists and others?
Not really. But yeah, overall, I think our life experience tells us that young people are more moldable, they are more flexible, they can be molded into different kind of persons, and the older you get, the less chance that you can alter a person dramatically, right? And that can be because we are more mature now, we are not easily led into astray, right? So that can be something good. It doesn't mean necessarily bad. Actually, the Confucian aim of cultivation is that you have less and less choices to make. You don't need to make choices. None of us here would even think about, here's a little kid. Should I kick him for fun? Because we are cultivated in ways that many things become unthinkable. And the ideal is that you can follow your heart's will without overstepping the lines. That's well cultivated, that you don't have to always make choices. You have led to a good path. You become a good person. So good things becomes who you are. The dancer becomes the dance, and dance becomes dancer. The one and the same thing. Right? Of course, by this, Confucius doesn't mean that older people can never learn new things. Yes, we can, but his emphasis is that, hey, young guys, you should start learning early, before it's too late. Right? So it's, again, a Kung Fu kind of practical advice. That sometimes you cannot take Confucius' sayings as statement about reality. Are the old people really cannot learn? No, he is talking about to his students. Most of them are young. So he is saying that when you are young, you should appreciate the chance to learn.
It's interesting that I heard a person who works with older people saying one of the things that older people have to do is be more flexible than they are as young people, because their bodies and minds sometimes don't do and act the way they want them to, and other people don't always act the way they want them to, and so they have to be more flexible than they were perhaps when they were younger.
That's a great point. That's a great point. Confucius will be glad to hear it.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. Please join me in another round of applause for Dr. Peimin Lee.
Thank you.